In the opening scene, a husband and wife are shown. The husband's name is Alden and the wife's name is Birdie. They are the hero and heroine of the film. The heroine is a lawyer and the hero collects robots. They both have a common interest in investigation, so they have joined a private investigation course. As they still have time before the class starts, they sit in the car and listen to a true crime podcast. The person hosting the podcast is named Laurel. Laurel typically discusses real-life crimes on her podcast. In 1994, there were a series of murders in an area called Roxdale, and the serial killer responsible for them was named the Roxdale serial killer. Alden and Birdie listen to Laurel's discussion about it. Laurel mentions that among the murdered women, one victim's name was Monica. After the serial killer murdered Monica, he left a note on her, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. After listening to the podcast, Alden and Birdie go to their class, which is being taught by a senior officer who has been with the police department for 25 years. The senior officer explains that evidence is always crucial in any crime, and that a private investigator must verify everything before coming to a conclusion. The 3-hour class ends, and Alden and Birdie leave. In the next scene, Birdie is in a yoga class. It seems she comes here every Sunday. The yoga trainer not only teaches yoga but also podcasts about how to maintain peace of mind. At the end of the class, the trainer reminds everyone not to forget to listen to her podcast. Alden comes to pick Birdie up, and they talk while walking. Birdie encounters her high school friend, Kristen. Birdie introduces Kristen as her friend from high school. This is the first time they've met since high school. Birdie introduces Kristen to Alden as her husband. Kristen mentions that she has been looking after her family business since her father's recent passing. Kristen hasn't married yet but has been dating someone for 2 months. Kristen invites Birdie and Alden for dinner at her place the next day and hands them her card before leaving. In the following scene, Alden and Birdie are at home. Alden picks up a box of cream buns he had bought, but finds that a rat has gnawed on them. Alden feels disappointed as the buns are ruined. Birdie reminds Alden that they have dinner at Kristen's house that night. Birdie is happy to reconnect with an old friend. Birdie leaves for her office after saying goodbye to Alden. Birdie works with her mother, who is also a lawyer. Birdie realizes she has lost the key to the locker containing important files. She watches an online video on how to open a locker using a hairpin and successfully learns the trick. In the next scene, the hero and heroine go to their friend's house. While the heroine and her friend are chatting, the hero looks at the things on the shelf. He gets excited seeing a book about the Roxdale serial killer written by Laurel on the shelf. The friend reveals that she published Laurel's book, as her family has been in the publishing business for a long time. The friend explains that best authors like Laurel are the reason their business is doing well. The hero sees that the book has Laurel's autograph. The friend offers to introduce them to Laurel if they want. Both the hero and heroine are big fans of Laurel and are thrilled at the prospect of meeting her. At that moment, the friend's boyfriend arrives. He is a detective whom the hero and heroine already know because they had helped him with a case before. The 4 of them casually chat and have dinner together. They promise to meet like this often. As they get ready to leave, the hero helps the heroine put on her coat, and a keychain falls off the table. It is the friend's car key, which has a duck-shaped charm. The hero asks if she likes ducks. The friend replies that her last name is Duckburn, and the logo of her publishing company is also a duck. The hero and heroine leave after telling the detective to call them if he needs help with another case. In the next scene, a middle-aged lady arrives at a podcast studio. She is Laurel, and her podcast starts at 9 o'clock. However, there is still a voiceover artist named Pat in the studio, who hasn't finished his recording yet. Laurel angrily asks him to leave as it is time. She complains to the studio manager about this. The studio manager tries to calm Laurel down. Laurel mentions that the episode she is going to record today is very important. After the voiceover artist leaves, Laurel enters the studio and starts her podcast. She announces that today is the final episode of the Roxdale serial killer case. The victims of the case were 3 women named Monica, Caroline, and Alexandra. Laurel states that justice was never served for these innocent women. She promises to reveal the truth about the serial killer. As she is saying this, a stranger wearing gloves and holding a gun enters the studio. We cannot see the stranger's face. The stranger shoots Laurel and leaves a note on her. The note says, "Silence is better than words," and is signed, RSK, which stands for Roxdale Serial Killer. The next morning, the police are at the crime scene. A detective explains the victim's details to a higher officer. The detective guesses that the cause of death is a gunshot. The bullet that the killer shot had passed through Laurel's body and hit the chair. The first person to see Laurel's body was the studio manager. He had left the studio when Laurel arrived at 9 o'clock the previous night. When he came in at 6:30 in the morning, he found Laurel dead. The security cameras had been faulty for the past year and had not been repaired. After seeing the note left by the killer, the police suspect that the serial killer who committed the murders in the 90s has returned. In the next scene, the news reports Laurel's murder, and the hero and heroine learn about it. They are both shocked. At the same time, the detective begins his investigation. The initial suspects are those who had access to the podcast studio: the studio manager, the voiceover artist, and the yoga trainer. We have already seen these three. Another suspect is Katie, another podcaster who was in competition with Laurel in the true crime podcast space. There's also a person who podcasts about science fiction, whom we'll call the sci-fi man. These five are the suspects, but their way of speaking during questioning confuses the detective, as they don't give direct answers. The detective remembers the hero and heroine. Meanwhile, the hero is at home trying to catch a rat with a robot, and the heroine is playing an online poker game. In the following scene, the detective visits the hero and heroine and asks for their help in the Laurel case. The hero and heroine are excited. The detective gives them Laurel's audio files and details of the Roxdale serial killer case found at the podcast studio. He asks them to come to the station the next day to investigate the suspects. The heroine asks if there's a chance the serial killer from the 90s has returned. The detective says it's something they need to find out and leaves. The hero and heroine set up a murder board and start analyzing the case. They pin up photos of the three victims from the serial killer case on the murder board. They believe the serial killer who killed those three women is the same one who killed Laurel, making her the fourth victim. The heroine wonders if Laurel's fame, which came from discussing the serial killer case, led the killer to identify and murder her. The hero agrees, saying it could be a strong motive for the killer. The police report doesn't mention the serial killer leaving a note at the three crime scenes in the 90s, but Laurel had mentioned in her podcast that he did. This confuses the heroine, but she is determined to solve the case. The hero, busy with the rat, is asked by the heroine to help with the case. The next day, the hero and heroine are at the police station and start investigating the suspects. The first suspect, the voiceover artist, says he didn't like Laurel but didn't kill her. The next suspect, the sci-fi man, knows nothing except science fiction series. The studio manager, when asked where he was the night of the murder, says he was at home with his mother, whose nickname is Kitten. The yoga trainer sees the heroine and says she looks familiar, to which the heroine replies that she attends the trainer's Sunday classes. The yoga trainer had also been doing a yoga podcast on the same days Laurel was recording her podcast. The heroine asks if there was any problem between them, and the yoga trainer, speaking like a sage, says he could never harm anyone. The detective mentions that people say he has a short temper, which angers the yoga trainer, who denies it. The heroine realizes that the trainer has a temper. The trainer offers to let them check his bag, which contains an asthma inhaler, noted by the hero. When investigating Katie, she suggests that either the Roxdale serial killer or Laurel's ex-husband could have killed Laurel. Katie explains that Laurel and her husband had issues and got divorced. Katie was at home the night of the murder but has no one to confirm her alibi. Katie knows the hero and heroine had solved a murder case before and asks them to discuss it on her podcast, which the heroine agrees to, provided they only talk about that case. The detective gets the details of Laurel's ex-husband, James, who, considering his age, could potentially be the 90s serial killer. James has a criminal record, including domestic violence, drunk driving, and trespassing. The detective suggests questioning James, and the hero and heroine insist on joining him. The detective agrees but advises them not to enter the house before he arrives. In the next scene, the hero and heroine wait outside James's house in their car. The hero suggests they look around the house for any evidence before the detective arrives, but the heroine disagrees. Despite this, the hero doesn't listen and starts checking the trash bins outside the house. James then arrives and invites them inside. He serves them cookies he baked and a glass of milk, showing great hospitality. James had been expecting the police to question him about Laurel's murder. He assumes he's their number one suspect. The hero directly asks James if he killed Laurel, but James denies it. The detective arrives and questions James. James expresses his sadness, stating that Laurel portrayed him as a bad person and divorced him. The detective mentions that Laurel had filed a domestic violence case against James, which James claims was false. James suggests they ask Maxwell for verification. When the heroine asks who Maxwell is, James asks if they haven't done proper research yet. James highlights that a few weeks ago, Laurel had come to him to apologize for divorcing him and damaging his reputation. When the detective asks James where he was on the night of the murder, James replies that he was at a book club meeting. They bid James goodbye and leave. The detective questions the hero and heroine on why they entered the house before he arrived. The hero explains that James invited them in. The detective advises them to follow instructions for their safety. He tells them he'll verify James's alibi, and they should find out who Maxwell is. In the following scene, the hero and heroine start listening to Laurel's audio files. Laurel had mentioned in her podcast that she intended to reveal the truth about the serial killer, which they believe was the reason for her murder. Since the laptop speakers are not clear, they decide to fix them and listen again. They then pin photos of the suspects on the murder board: the yoga trainer, voiceover artist, Katie, and studio manager. They remove the sci-fi man from the suspect list as he seems too innocent. The next day, the heroine is at her office. Her mother seems to be aware that the hero and heroine are investigating Laurel's case. Her mother asks if they will catch the killer. The heroine is not confident, as the case is linked to an old one with many missing details. Her mother motivates her, saying that if they try step by step, they will surely find a solution. That night, the hero and heroine go to the podcast studio. Katie had invited them to discuss their solved murder case on her podcast. Outside the studio, a TV reporter is saying there are no new updates on the serial killer case. When the hero and heroine enter the studio, it is empty. As the hero mentions how quiet the studio is, Katie runs towards them, screaming that the serial killer grabbed her, and she escaped. The hero and heroine inform the detective, who arrives and questions Katie. Katie describes the killer as being around 6 feet tall, wearing a hoodie, with brown eyes and a low voice. The heroine gets an idea and asks the reporter outside the studio to let her see their car's dashcam footage. After checking the footage, the heroine returns to the studio and asks to speak to Katie privately. The twist is revealed: the serial killer was never there, and Katie didn't see anyone. The dashcam footage showed that no one entered or left the studio in the last 30 minutes. Katie admits to lying, explaining that she did it because she desperately wanted her true crime podcast to be successful and didn't want to be blamed for the murder. The next day, the hero and heroine set traps all over the house to catch the rat. They then listen to Laurel's audio file again. The hero has bought new speakers for this purpose. While listening to Laurel's final podcast, they hear the gunshot followed by a squeaking sound, similar to the sound made by an asthma inhaler. The hero remembers seeing an asthma inhaler in the yoga trainer's bag that day. They decide to question the yoga trainer. In the following scene, the hero and heroine go to a yoga class, pretending to do yoga while observing the trainer. The hero struggles as he is not used to doing yoga. Because the yoga trainer has a short temper, they decide not to question him and instead go to the detective. They inform the detective about the squeaking sound in Laurel's audio and the yoga trainer's asthma inhaler. The detective tells them that the yoga trainer is not the killer, as he had an asthma attack and was in the hospital on the night of the murder. There is a doctor's witness and security footage to confirm this. The detective has collected letters sent to Laurel and shows them to the heroine. He asks if they have found any information about Maxwell. The hero and heroine admit they forgot to focus on Maxwell while investigating the yoga trainer. The detective reveals the doctor's report that Laurel died from a gunshot but was also in the final stages of cancer and had only 2 to 3 months to live. This may explain why she sought forgiveness from James. The serial killer never left notes with the victims, contrary to what Laurel mentioned in her podcast. The heroine suggests the detective check this information. In the next scene, the hero and heroine are at home. Following the detective's advice, they remove the yoga trainer's photo from the murder board and start searching for information about Maxwell. In articles written by Laurel about the 90s serial killer, Officer Maxwell is mentioned. Following a series of 3 murders, the mayor had created a task force, and Maxwell was one of the officers. Laurel had written that Maxwell did not conduct the investigation properly. A few days later, Maxwell was dismissed from the police department. This gives Maxwell a motive to take revenge on Laurel. They add Maxwell to their suspect list and find out that he is currently in a nursing home. In the next scene, the hero and heroine go to the old age home, pretending to be a couple teaching salsa dance. While entering their names in the register, the heroine notices Laurel's name, indicating that she recently visited Maxwell. They find Maxwell's room, numbered 312. After dancing with the elderly for a while, they head to Maxwell's room, where he is seated alone in a wheelchair. The hero explains that they are investigating Laurel's murder. Maxwell tells them to find the killer quickly and thanks whoever killed the woman who ruined his life. When the hero asks if Maxwell killed Laurel, he denies leaving the old age home. The heroine asks who might have killed Laurel and if there is a chance the serial killer has returned. Maxwell implies they are chasing a non-existent person. He recounts that in the 90s, 3 women were murdered in quick succession, and while the police were investigating, Laurel suggested in her article that it was the work of a serial killer. This led the police to link the 3 murders and start investigating them as connected cases. Through an anonymous source, Laurel learned many truths about the murders that the police were unaware of. Maxwell had hoped Laurel could help with the investigation, but she refused to cooperate. Following this, the evidence the police had gathered disappeared. Laurel then wrote another article criticizing Maxwell's investigation, accusing him of letting the serial killer escape, which ultimately cost Maxwell his job. Maxwell believes Laurel was responsible for stealing the evidence. 2 weeks before her death, Laurel visited Maxwell to apologize, likely because she knew she was dying of cancer and sought forgiveness for her actions, as she had done with James. The heroine starts to wonder where the evidence related to the 3 murders is now. In the following scene, the hero and heroine are at home. Their traps haven't caught the rat yet. The hero opens a magazine to solve a crossword puzzle, but it has been chewed by the rat. Noticing a logo on the next page, the heroine recalls seeing the same logo on a letter sent to Laurel at the police station. It is the logo of a storage company. The heroine guesses that Laurel's important items might be kept in that storage company's facility. She feels grateful that their rat problem helped in their investigation. In the next scene, the hero and heroine go to the storage company's locker area. The heroine suspects that the items Laurel stored there might include the evidence stolen from the police in the 90s. Having practiced opening locks without a key, the heroine uses her tools to unlock the storage unit. Inside, they find various items, including a box labeled, "Evidence." They open the box and find fingerprints, cigarette butts, and a victim's pink shawl, evidence related to the 3 murders that the police had investigated. Laurel had stolen them, preventing the police from conducting DNA tests and properly investigating the case. The hero and heroine decide to take the evidence box to the detective. In the next scene, the hero and heroine hand over the evidence box to the detective, who says they will give it to the lab to see if there's a DNA match. The heroine asks if it's possible to test it after 30 years, and the detective assures her that even a small DNA trace can be matched with family members to confirm. The hero notes that there's nothing linking the 3 murders from the 90s. The detective, after checking, finds that the serial killer never left a note with the victims, confirming that the idea of a serial killer was a lie created by Laurel. The detective states that Laurel's articles, books, and podcasts perpetuated this lie, making people believe it. The heroine asks who killed Laurel. The detective suggests someone tried to frame the non-existent serial killer. Laurel had no friends, only enemies like those at the podcast studio, her ex-husband James, and Officer Maxwell. They discuss who among them had the strongest motive. The heroine theorizes that Laurel's lies might have led to her murder. The detective suggests informing their friend, who published Laurel's book, about the falsehoods. The next day, the hero, heroine, and detective are at the friend's house, informing her about Laurel's lies. The friend is shocked to learn that everything in the case was a lie. The heroine explains that while the 3 murders did happen, there was no connection between them and no serial killer. The detective adds that if Laurel were alive, she would have been arrested for tampering with the investigation and stealing evidence. The friend is upset, as she didn't expect Laurel to act this way. Since the information in Laurel's book is false, the publishing company could face issues, and the friend needs to consult a lawyer and consider reprinting the book. They comfort the friend and leave. The hero suggests adding the friend to the suspect list, as she had a motive to keep Laurel's lies secret. The detective reminds them that they all had dinner together on the night of the murder. The hero's doubt arises from the fact that if the friend knew about Laurel's lies, she would want to keep it hidden. The detective advises the hero and heroine to thoroughly check Laurel's audio files before suspecting their friend. In the following scene, the hero and heroine listen to Laurel's final audio file again. After Laurel mentions revealing the truth about the serial killer, they hear a gunshot followed by a squeaking sound and then Laurel's last words in a low voice. Amplifying the sound, they clearly hear Laurel say, "Thanks, Katie," before dying. Laurel thanked Katie for ending her suffering from cancer. The hero and heroine realize that Katie is the killer and excitedly inform the sleeping detective via video call. The detective confirms that Katie, Laurel's competitor in the true crime podcast space, had the motive. Katie even staged the fake serial killer attack to divert the police. The 3 conclude that Katie is the killer. The next morning, the detective arrests Katie, who denies killing Laurel. The hero and heroine watch as the detective handcuffs Katie and takes her away. The hero feels something isn't right, but the heroine reminds him that evidence is key, as they were taught in class. In the climax, the detective and friend are at the hero and heroine's house, celebrating the case being solved. The hero tells the detective he isn't satisfied despite closing the case. The detective reminds him that everyone claims innocence when arrested, and it's important not to get confused by that. Suddenly, the hero realizes something and asks the friend if she killed Laurel. The heroine and detective are shocked. The heroine points out that Laurel said, "Thanks, Katie," in the recording. The hero clarifies that Laurel didn't say, Katie, but KD, short for Kristen Duckburn, which is the friend's full name. The hero remembers seeing the autograph in Laurel's book addressed to KD. The friend argues that she was with them the entire evening and couldn't have killed Laurel. The detective explains that the murder happened after they left. The heroine realizes that Laurel recently told the friend about her cancer and the lie about the serial killer. Laurel intended to confess everything in her final podcast episode, which would have harmed the book's sales and the friend's business. The friend requested Laurel not to reveal the truth, but Laurel was determined to do so. This led the friend to shoot Laurel at the podcast studio. The squeaking sound after the gunshot wasn't an asthma inhaler but the friend's duck-shaped keychain. The friend admits to everything. She takes the detective's gun and aims it at the 3 of them, planning to kill them and blame the non-existent serial killer. At that moment, the rat, which had been wandering around the house, climbs onto the friend's shoe, startling her. The detective seizes the opportunity to disarm and handcuff her. He finally arrests the real killer and thanks the hero and heroine for their help. The rat gets caught in the trap set by the hero, and the heroine jokingly says they are now a team, helping each other. The hero overcomes his fear of the rat. In the final scene, the police release Katie, and the hero and heroine share their experience on Katie's podcast. They reveal that Laurel stole the evidence from the police to maintain her lie. Using that evidence, the police identified the real killers involved in the 3 murders, which were committed by different individuals. The victims' families finally get some closure. As the film ends, it hints at a sequel. The FBI comes to the heroine, wanting to talk about her father. The heroine says he died when she was 6, but the FBI officer says that's not true, shocking the hero and heroine.